Welcome to This Week in Christian History, a podcast from the Center for Christian History at Mississippi College. The Center for Christian History is dedicated to expanding knowledge and understanding of Christian history. Our mission is to provide a scholarly, unbiased look at the events, figures, and movements that have shaped Christianity over the centuries. You can visit centerforchristianhistory.com for daily historical highlights. And each week on this podcast, we'll do a deep dive into key moments with Christian history's leading authorities. First up on our list of historical highlights for the week is cartoonist Johnny Hart, the creator of the comic strip BC. Though he was reared in a Christian home, Hart didn't take his faith seriously until later in life, and he began using the popularity of his comic strip to share it. Some protested that Hart shared his faith too much and was forcing it on people, but Hart didn't care. Some even believe that Hart was the most read Christian author of the 20th century because his comic strips appeared in hundreds of newspapers daily. Johnny Hart died on April 7th, 2007. Next up on our list, and the subject of our deep dive, is the Council of Trent and the Latin Vulgate. Sola Scriptura, one significant motto of the Protestant Reformation, is Latin for only Scripture, demonstrating the belief of the reformers that doctrine should be based on the Bible alone. The Counter-Reformation undertaken by the Roman Catholic Church had its beginnings at the years-long Council of Trent in Trento, Italy. In April in the mid-1500s, the council decided that the official Bible of the Catholic Church would be Jerome's Vulgate translation from AD 405. While Jerome also translated the Apocrypha with the Bible, he held to Bishop Athanasius' previous declaration that the Apocrypha was not part of the canon of Scripture. Last up on our list of historical highlights for the week is Adoniram Judson. Judson was a pioneer in the world of foreign missions as the first American missionary to Burma. He spent many years in the country with his wife Anne by his side, and he translated parts of the Bible into the Burmese language. Judson College in Alabama was named for Ann Judson, and Judsonia, Arkansas was named for Adoniram Judson, who died on April 12, 1850. Today in our deep dive, Nick Walters, director of the Center for Christian History, talks with Edwin Woodruff Tait about the Council of Trent and the Latin Vulgate.
We're glad to have as our guest today Dr. Edwin Woodruff Tait, who is, in addition to being a fantastic independent scholar, also subs around as the contributing editor to Christian History magazine, who we are glad to have a great working relationship with the folks at the Christian History Institute. And today we are talking specifically in our deep dive about the inclusion of the Vulgate, don't worry, we'll get to what that means, during the Council of Trent that happened on April 8th in 1545. So, good doctor, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so this is great for us to be able to learn more, and this is an important component, I think, for both Protestants and Catholics alike to understand as they're trying to figure out, okay, why does the Catholic Bible weigh a little bit more than the Protestant Bible does when having these extra books? Part of all of that, the story gets solved, right? And part of the things that we're talking about today. So talk to us a little bit, though, about the Council of Trent. What was it? What was the reason for it to exist? And tell us about the council itself.
Well, the Council of Trent was called in 1546 after many, many years of debate to try to address two issues. One was internal problems of reform within the Catholic Church, which people have been trying to solve for a long time. And the other, of course, was a response to the Protestant Reformation. By the time that the Council of Trent was actually called, people who thought that much late medieval Catholic teaching wasn't according to Scripture, what we would now call Protestants, had organized themselves. There were rulers who were favoring those new ideas. There were organized churches. There was a full-blown schism, a division in Western Christianity underway. And so both the Holy Roman Emperor, who was the most important political leader, certainly in Central Europe and in some ways in all of Europe, and the Pope wanted to address this. They saw this as a serious threat. And the emperor wanted to address it by calling a council. But the Pope wasn't so sure because popes had problems with councils in the 15th century. Councils had tried to limit papal authority.
Mm.
And so there was a lot of back and forth on, are we going to have a council? Where is it going to be? Who's going to be in charge? Meanwhile, the whole thing just kept getting more and more out of control, right? And so it finally was called in 1546, but it didn't end until 1563 because there were wars, there was plague. They kept having to adjourn it and then reconvene.
Sure.
So there were a lot of gaps.
And there's all this other just overarching just political things that were driven by this whole thing, right? I mean, by the whole Reformation, the whole Protestant dust ruffle, right, that was going on. That factored into it too, right?
Right. So the emperor, the other part of his attempt to reestablish unity was in the late 1540s, there was a war that he fought against the Protestant rulers within Germany. And he temporarily defeated them, forced them to accept a compromise where they would accept, until the council was finished settling things, they would accept some Catholic practices into their territories back again. There was a huge controversy over that. And then things went against him and he was defeated. And so there was all this back and forth in the late 1540s.
A lot of upheaval in addition to just things that would be church-related ecumenical things, right? I mean,
right. Well, the church, church and state, nobody, maybe except for a few crazy Anabaptists who everybody wanted to kill, nobody wanted to separate church and state. That was not what this was about. In fact, the Protestants in some ways wanted many of them wanted more control over the church by the government. They saw the government as their hope to get the kind of reforms they wanted. Mm-hmm. And so everybody, politics and religion were just deeply intertwined, in a way that I think modern Westerners have trouble sometimes imagining.
Right. Yeah. Because those are the two things we're never supposed to talk about at dinner, right?
Well, I don't think that's worked out too well for us personally. I think when you don't talk about them and you also aren't willing to talk about how they're related to each other, I think you wind up in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Well, what were some of the church reforms that the Council of Trent? I mean, did they start off with Pope Paul coming in with here's 18 things we got to get solved, or did they pull together on things we knew we needed to do and it kind of evolved?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Well, first of all, the Pope was not physically present, so they called the emperor didn't want it to be called in papal territory, so they wound up that Trent is this little town in northern Italy that was under imperial control, but it wasn't that. It's northern Italy, so it's not like it's way across the Alps from Rome. So the Pope could kind of keep an eye on things. So the Pope had legates, so representatives that were present at the council, and they led the council and they exercised a leadership role. But it was not completely controlled by the Pope's legates. There was a lot of different agendas. There were a lot of bishops, leaders of religious orders, theologians present at the council, with a wide variety of ideas they had about what kind of reforms they needed. Some of whom wanted to give more ground to the Protestants. Some of them wanted to have language about justification that allowed for a kind of compromise position, a version of justification by faith alone. Not alone exactly, but they had this thing called double justification that would allow for, at the end of the day, our works are always imperfect, and so you always need imputed righteousness. So they had a version of Protestant teaching they were trying to incorporate. That failed, but that was a serious debate. There were debates about scripture and tradition. Now, a lot of these things were live debates. It wasn't just a settled agenda entirely. As far as the kind of moral reforms, there were some things everyone knew they needed to deal with. Everyone knew it was a problem that priests were supposed to be celibate, but a lot of them were just openly living with women. That they knew this was a problem. They knew that kind of the internal divisions within the Catholic Church were a problem. One of the misconceptions people have is that the medieval Catholic Church was just this kind of monolith where the Pope just said, hey, jump, and everybody said, how high? That's not how it worked. Even within the church hierarchy, the religious orders were operating sometimes kind of on their own, almost like they were their own little churches. And so one of the goals of the Council of Trent was to exalt the power of the local bishops, to give them more control over what went on in their territory. So you didn't have all these different groups running around in a given place, doing their own thing. And so a
Okay.
lot of the decrees about reform were about the bishops. The bishops were supposed to take the lead in theological education. The whole concept of a seminary, as we know it, the term seminary was basically invented by the Council of Trent. The idea was that every bishop would have to establish a school to train priests. So you would have educated priests, and they were being taught a kind of standard curriculum that would promote orthodoxy and, the good character and godliness, and that was under the control of the local bishop. So there was a lot of stuff like that. They were reaffirming traditional beliefs and practices the Protestants were criticizing, right? They of course reaffirmed transubstantiation. They reaffirm that it's okay to honor saints and to use images in devotion. But the other side of that is they say we got to make sure these are approved images that are not in some way inappropriate, and that it's being done in a way that avoids idolatry. I mean, they understood that there were popular practices that maybe were questionable, right? So they were trying to clamp down on those. So it was this kind of double agenda of, we want to condemn these new Protestant ideas that we see as heretical, but we also want to make sure that we're actually have a kind of disciplined church that's really setting a good example and not giving ground for criticism by failing to live up to its own ideals. That was at least the goal.
You can watch the rest of Nick's interview with Edwin Woodruff Tait on the Center for Christian History website at centerforchristianhistory.com. This Week in Christian History is produced for the Center for Christian History by Blue and Gold Media at Mississippi College, in cooperation with the MC Department of Communication. For episode transcripts and more information, visit centerforchristianhistory.com. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube Music, or wherever fine podcasts are found. Our next episode is coming next week. Thank you for listening.